Hey, Planeswalkers, Mythras here. Hope you're doing well and staying safe. Today is the day. I am extremely excited because I've been talking about this for a while, and this is a culmination of work over the last month and a half. So, very excited. We are going to take a look at a tier list. So, this, for those of you that do not know, a tier list is essentially, in terms of Magic, a collection of the decks that are subjectively ranked by their respective viability and high-level competitive settings. So again, these are taking a look at competitive rankings of the current standard meta for the July 2020 season. We've gotten past the companion changes, some of the bans, and then also now seeing core 2021. So a lot of things going on. Now, what I would like to do for you is we're going to do three things. The first, we're going to talk about the tier list. So we'll take a look at the rankings. The second is some key observations that I have about the current list. And then third, we're going to dive into each of the respective decks and talk a little bit about what they are and the high level strategy. Now, these are all decks that were most likely in the top 1500 that I've been doing, and they'll have links for you so that you can go check those out. Now, before we do that, I just want to say, as always, appreciate your support. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel down there to stay up to date on current content, decks, tier list, stuff like this, strategy, gameplay, and feel free to like me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter and Twitch. All right, so with that said, the tier list as well is down below in the description. You'll have access to it. Again, there's a link to each of the decks that are covered today. I did happen to play all those, and we're going to dive into it here and take a look at roughly 20 decks. So very excited about this. So let's go ahead and pop over. I put a lot of work into this. Put all the decks in the tier setting here. So for tier 1, we have Rakdos, Mono Red, Mono Green, Stompy, Mono White. Tier 2, we have Mono Black, Bant Ramp, Boros Houndmaster, Temur Reclamation, Sac, Simic Ramp, Temur Clover, Gruul Aggro mid, and then tier 3 we got Sultai Ramp, Azorius Control, Simic Flash, Orzhov Yorion, and Temur Elementals to round things out. So big things here, you guys. I do a three level tier base. It is kind of in a bell curve, so we'll see 3 to 4 in the tier 1, and again 3 to 4 kind of in that tier 3 spot, and the rest more clumped together in the middle there. So that's exactly what we've done here. A couple things that I don't do a 1.5, but things that were kind of border for me. Definitely mono white and mono black. This was the #1 deck, especially at the beginning of the season. You guys can go check that out. Mono white excels really well. And again, probably in the middle. One of the reasons why I put it here is you guys can go check it out. I did hit Mythic off this deck. Now, I did create another version that I'll publish here soon for you guys, but the list here is definitely viable to help you get there. Now, the other one that I would say that I was kind of on the border of would have been Simic Flash, in terms of more so of a tier 2. And then the one maybe coming down or pulling down from a tier 2 into a tier 3 for me maybe could have been Boros Houndmaster, Bant Ramp, and Gruul Aggro. Again, just depends. Bant runs really well. It's currently a #1 deck again. The one here I think was like #2, but for best of 1, it's a little bit different game, you guys. So this is a tier list for best of 1, not best of 3. So we got to keep that in mind. The setup's a little bit different. So that is the list. Like I said, down below in the description, you guys can see it stack ranked. You can see the links to the decks and hop in and play them right away. Now, a big call out here, and I don't know if you guys have caught this already, but maybe you did at the beginning. There is a very, very strong viability right now with the monocolored decks. So as you can see, we got red, green, white, and black here. There is no mono blue, which is kind of interesting. I've seen and I have on my list to play a mono blue tempo deck, but there's not a bunch of it right now in the current meta in terms of the competitive nature of the deck. So this is pretty interesting. Like I said, we haven't seen this in a while. I think it's also what tends to make core unique. Generally, in my experience over the years, we always kind of see a stronger monocolored deck when the core stuff drops. But again, just my opinion and observations. I think that's pretty interesting. Now, the other observation here is when we go to talk about best of 3, and I may still put together a best of 3 tier list as well, so stay tuned for that. A lot of this stuff will switch up. Stuff like Simic becomes a tier 1 or a tier 2, tier 1. Bant Ramp, absolutely tier 1. Temur Rec becomes tier 1. Those kinds of things. So the one that really definitely stays is probably Rakdos Sac, but a lot of these other ones begin to fall out of the tier 1, tier 2 spot, and we begin to switch those around. So with that said, if you got questions, if there's a deck that you want my opinion on where it fits in here, again, this is not an exhaustive list. It is a list of the majority of the decks that I've played over the last month and a half competitively, as well as put together a lot of these videos for you guys. Please let me know. Additionally, this is all based off of information that I have read across the internet as well as gameplay. It fits very accurately into my untapped data collection as well from what I've played. You definitely see a lot more games with these 5 decks at the top here in terms of what you're playing against, as well as the matchup ratios and win conditions and things like that. So hopefully you guys like it. Like I said, if there's something you'd like me to know, like Selesnya counters or other decks that are out there that we don't have, like a Dimmer Flash, happy to give you guys my opinion. Please feel free to ask. All right, so with that, we'll move on to the next portion here of the tier list. We're going to actually dive into each of these decks. I'm going to try and knock this out in the next 15 minutes or so. If you would like a more in-depth analysis of the decks or see some gameplay, check out the videos. Absolutely there for you guys to do that. All right, so tier 1, let's get going with Rakdos Sac. So big components here. This was the top 10 deck for a while. It's really weird. I don't know why this broke. Maybe you guys know, and maybe I missed an update there or something. But this one does run Lurrus. And big pieces that we picked up are Archfiend's Vessel, so the ability to pull Archfiend back with Call of Death Dweller and get a flyer. And then Fiend Artisan is another newcomer here. This is one version of Rakdos Sac. Again, this is not an exhaustive collection of Rakdos Sac decks, but definitely this is, within the shell, exactly where we want to be. Here's the sideboard. Again, I cover that stuff in detail for you. But primarily note it is heavily oriented towards green decks, as well as a big piece when you need to pull out Lurrus and pop in Mayhem Devils for additional ping for against some of the aggro decks. So, all right, next. Tier 1, Mono Red. So I really enjoy Mono Red, best of 1. I have hit Mythic once or twice now in the last 2 months off it. Again, I did not hit it this month off it, but it was a huge deck that I played a bunch to help me get there. It didn't help me get over the hump in Diamond, but it got me to Diamond, halfway through Diamond, and decided to kind of switch things up. This mono red deck is a top 500 Cavalcade deck. There are decks that I have published for you guys that are pure mono red, that are not like more red deck wins oriented, aggro oriented versus the Cavalcade deck. I do think this is a good one. Absolutely, I played this a bunch too, and found it very viable. So stay tuned if you guys want. Again, you can subscribe down over there. I do plan to publish more in-depth analysis on my mono red deck that hit top 1200 last month, and still a viable option for this season. Again, here's some of the sideboard cards, primarily set up for you to clear creatures out of your way against other aggro decks. Nothing really in there, in my opinion, to kind of help you take down, except minus the life gains big, take down some of the, what I'll just say, more of the tier 2 decks like Bant Ramp, as well as some of the life gain decks. And this has a hard matchup against mono white too. All right. Mono green Stompy. So I love this deck. I think it's a lot of fun. I really wish I could have played it more. Still can this season. I haven't ran the best with it, so I've stayed away. Now there are a lot of cool variations of this deck as well. I think this was like a top 10 one again, and obviously if you go check out the video down below, I'll give you the more accurate piece there. But big components, we got Primal Might. We also got Scavenging Ooze. Now, I love this card. I was a big Modern player with it for a long time. It just does so many things, and the ability to really hurt sacrifice decks right now and some of the Bant stuff and other things out there makes this a very, very viable option. And then we have the ability to clear out some of those enchantments and artifacts, and we got a lot of options, some card draw and those things too. Now, sideboard again is primarily for taking out creatures or taking out some of the stuff out of the graveyards, like we said, direct damage, pure blue counters. This one was again primarily a mono best of one deck. This sideboard was something I enhanced primarily for the down 5 here, so if you want to pull something out on the side and have some other finishers. All right, so next, what do we got? We got our final tier 1 deck here, mono white. So this one was a top 10 deck, extensively played. I played this specific one a bunch early in the season. I could not get it necessarily to run well for me, but it did run decently. And when I say well, I mean I like to get decks early on into the diamond running like 60% if I can. So I'll fault that on the player. Now I did, like I mentioned, use a mono white deck to get me to Mythic. So this is all good options. I like the Banishing Light in here. This thing, I put in mine as well because I think it's very important to help you get around some other things. God's Willing is something I need to add in still, and debating on that one heavily. It helps you against the sacrifice decks a ton. We do have Elseed's Life's Bounty here as well. This one's great. Now, one thing people forget, here's a pro tip for you, is that you can also protect your enchantments with this guy. And I've had Rakdos Sac players and other players try and take some of my enchantments before, like Annex or something like that. As an example, again, not mono. That's not a mono white, but I've had them try to take Heliod and sack it. Those kinds of things. That is a good way to kind of get around those. So, or Doxos and all that. So something to think about. They're not necessarily going to be able to sack Heliod. So, all right. With that said, here's the sideboard. Again, heavily slated to creatures and other triggers. Hushbringer's great. Just a reminder that it's going to shut your own stuff down. This was the sideboard that I put together here as well, primarily because this was a best of one deck. All right, on to tier 2. So we're going to open with mono black aggro. I really like this deck. I played it a bunch at the beginning. Again, this was the number 1 deck for a while, and it runs really, really well in best of one. I just ran into certain problems with the particular meta I was facing, so I did not continue to play it. Again, this is kind of why I have it in the tier 2, tier 1, really in the middle, but I just don't like the 0.5. I think you got to make a decision. So big pieces we picked up: Demonic's Embrace, we got Straps here, we got Eliminate, lots of things for taking out the board. I played mono black a ton last season too, with extinctions and things like that. Great sideboard here, again primarily focused on helping you take out your opponent's creatures and clearing the board and making way for your stuff. Now a 10-7 flyer is pretty nasty on turn 4. I'll just say that right there. Usually that's enough to get you over the hump to win the game. All right, next we got Bant Ramp. So I really like Bant Ramp. In the current meta, again, I've hit Mythic Invitational. I'm debating about going down this path here for best of 3. Many of you guys obviously know me as a best of 1 player. This is high on my list in terms of consideration. The land stuff can be a little funky at times, but the big pickups here are Jolreel, again, Scavenging Ooze we've picked up to Fury, and now we have Ugin. So Ugin's a great finisher. Very annoying when you can clear the board and those kinds of things. The other trick here that's pro is Jolreel here. When you get the lands out with Nissa, it's going to create a base value that's higher. So instead of a 3/3 land, you're going to have a 3/3 plus, which gets pretty nasty. Sideboard, primarily around setup for around mirror matches, other control decks, and some graveyard hate. Plus, I'd say a little bit specific damage control there with Tolsimir. All right. Next, tier 2, Boros Houndmaster. So this deck was super hot right at the beginning of M21. I still think it's great, a lot of fun, but like I said, kind of borderline with at times with tier 3. And the reason why is it's not always consistent. There is no real direct damage here. It's all creatures, which I think when you can't necessarily remove stuff off the board, it puts you into a bit of a bind at times, or remove things. But it is very heavy on that aggro side, and the board thinning with Houndmaster is great. Next we have, this sideboard covers pretty much what I just talked about. So that's what's going to really help you in the best of 3 matches. But again, it's a little bit different in terms of the best of 1. You can make it a little bit different. Next we have Temur Reclamation. I really enjoy this deck. I had a lot of fun playing it. I did not run it well necessarily in the video that I showed you guys in for best of 1. Partially also why I think it is a tier 2 for best of 1, but lots of options here with this deck. We're running Jolreel again, and what else did we pick up here? Nothing else. Sideboard, maybe a few things. Scavenging News. So again, that's that Rakdos hate, or Sac hate, and Soul Seer is great too. So this is a key card. This would remove things absolutely like Heliod, so keep that in mind. Great counter to a mono white deck. All right, next tier 2, Rakdos Sac. So this deck is primarily pretty similar to the one that we were running last season. In fact, this is the one from last season that I'm showing. Migration Path was always a debatable card, but the ability to cycle here and also do some thinning was nice. You probably could go with the new one that's in the ramp decks from M21, and we could update this list for you a little bit. But again, the premise is the same. Sideboard here as well, mainly for clearing out things, and a little bit more oriented towards some of the control decks. All right, next we have Simic Ramp. So this deck I really like. This one here is I want to say top 100 deck, maybe top 25. The big pieces that we picked up, at least this one too, which is pretty sweet. You guys can go and check it out. I really like this deck. It's just the prevent all combat damage. We got Teffi here, and then the discontinuity. Discontinuity is super nasty. You can play this before your opponent's draw step, and if they try and do some funny business on your turn, you can just shut the turn down. So big pieces that we picked up. The ramp's really right there. We have Fey Wishes. Lots of different things and ways to interact. Big one, Pull Ugin. Win conditions. Nissa. You got Euro. Are really your big ones, and the other ones are really on the sideboard here. All right, next we have Temur Clover. So this has been around a while. At one point being the best deck in the meta, tier 1, even for best of 1 potentially, but slowly kind of dropping down the other way. And again, there's just the meta's gotten a lot better. The decks have become more of a challenge for this, especially in the aggro stuff. I mean, you can really rip through this pretty quickly. Mono white especially. I mean, you can delay a little bit and you can do a few things, but I haven't had any problems here. Plus, you can sideboard if you're best of 3 pretty easily to just get rid of Lucky Clover, unfortunately. All right, next. Gruul Aggro mid. So jokingly, I saw something on Reddit the other day that said Gruul Aggro is dead, and partially true to one extent, but to the other, I still think it runs really well. You got the Scavenging News here. You got a lot of key components. Rada's been a huge improvement for the deck. Garruk, I think, is really undervalued right now. I really like this card in terms of game bodies. You guys can go check out the Golgari aggro deck I just did the other day and really see how this card plays. It fit really well in that deck. And Terror of Peaks is awesome. I've put together like a Dragons deck with this thing and ran it competitively. for mono red, and it was like 55-60% win for a while. It's very, very interesting. Every time you drop someone on, dealing that damage, clearing the board, and pinging is great. Next sideboard, again, primarily focusing on some removal on the board, but taking out really enchantments and artifacts, clearing out the graveyard, and then shifting Ceratops here for that mono blue stuff. And then Vivian's Monster Advocate's great. Many of you know that from Ikoria. All right. Next, we're on to our last tier here. We got tier 3, Sultai Ramp. I just played this one recently. You guys can go check that out. We pick up some great things here. We got Eliminate, we got Joel Reel, we covered that. Here's the ramp card, particularly the one that I was talking about that you could swap on the John Sack deck. It's Cultivate. This thing's great. Eat to Extinction, Extinction Event. I really like those cards in this. Again, Ugin, and the other big one's Massacre Worm. So I think this is a lot of fun, a lot of tricks and things you guys can do here with this deck. Ran really well for me too in the video that I did. And then again, some of the sideboard, lots of 1-ofs for taking certain things out. I cover that quite extensively in the other video as well. Now, the other thing that's pretty interesting about this deck is not a lot of 4-ofs. It's more focused on 2-ofs, and 1-ofs, which really makes games interesting, if you ask me. All right. Next, Azorius Control. So, this is pretty typical standard Azores today. We've pretty much just added to Fury Master of Time. The win conditions aren't the best. You got Yorion, and you got a giant shark. Outside that, the big one's Baneslayer Angel. This deck actually runs 2-of. I put an additional Aether Gust in, so keep that in mind. But that's, to me, this is a lot slower, but if you can get control of the board state, you're going to do really well. The problem I have with this particular one, even though it's a top-ranked one, again, is you're not having any direct counters. You're kind of letting them load the board and then trying to remove that way. You do have Elspeth to take stuff off the board, which is always an amazing card. But I think the ability to slam a Ugin still and do some other things just doesn't make this the best option, I would say. And it is particularly slow. For best of one, Mono Red eats this for lunch. All right. Simic Flash. So I'm a huge Simic Flash fan. Like I said, this was a debate for me. Big pickups here. Rewind, Lofty Denial. I think the deck runs great. Baron, Tolarian, Archmage. Really, really good. I ran this for best of 3 for a while and did fairly well with it. Additionally, I've done pretty well with it in best of 1. But again, it can be slow. The mana base, you can get tricked on at times with the double. So it's just something to be careful of. The ability to get to rewind, though, and one other cast in, will most likely seal the deal for you in most matches. Sideboard is definitely set to help with more of the aggro matches. Additionally, with some of the Rakdos sacrifice decks too. All right. Next, we got Orzhov Yorion. So this was a super hot deck for a while towards the end of last season. Ryan Yorion there. Again, that's kind of weird. Like I said, I don't know what's going on. Maybe you guys know. And, we got the discard, the Rat, and the Yorick's Fenlurker. But it fits really well. This deck's super fun to play. Still competitive, but it can be slow, and you can play around a lot of this stuff with some of the mono decks. And the sideboard here, again... All right. Last but not least, we did it in like 15 minutes. We got Temur Elementals. So again, very similar. Oh, this one's actually illegal, so I should take that back and pick a different one. Apologies. But the list that I had, I need to rebuild this for you guys. But we're doing all right. Quickly here, base is still the same. You're going to drop Agent. And the whole premise here is to constantly ping. You can use Omnath. You can use Cavalier of Thorns. The Temur Elementals deck, what I would say, instead of this guy here, runs Ugin. I ran into a lot of Ugins playing against this deck. the big thing here is, again, it's still slow. It takes a lot to get it going, but once it gets going, then you do well. It does not hold up well against some of the other late game decks. This deck really has to play some more of the aggro ones and then not be able to get aggroed out, essentially. And then sideboard is primarily set up again for some of the mirror match, some of the more late game stuff, and then some of the aggro stuff and sack decks. All right, so again, apologies on that. That's not actually a legal deck, so you guys can just skip the Temur Elementals one. I'll try and make a new video for you. I need to update that anyway, and let you know when we do that. All right, Planeswalkers, let's go back here. So finally, again, this is the tier list for you. The deck list, the tier list and decks are available down below in the description. Please feel free to support the channel by subscribing over there. As always, I just like to say thank you, appreciate that support. Feel free to like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Twitch, and hope you guys enjoyed it. I spent a lot of time pulling this together for you. I've played a bunch, and I think it's pretty well thought out for you. If you got questions, though, always happy to answer and ask down below in the comments and talk through it with you. Want to help you out, figure out where things sit, and you know, a tier 1 deck for me might not be a tier 1 deck for you, and that's okay. I believe in how everyone needs to play, and for me, this is all about trying to be helpful. So, all right, Planeswalkers, you take care, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon. Best of luck with the rest of this July 2020 season, and may your decks win. All right, we'll see you around soon. Mythras out.